Welcome to the Board of Education's November 7th, 2022 work session. Please stand as we observe a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Mr. Triplett.
Face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Triplett. I believe we have Representative McKenzie in the audience tonight. Thank you for joining us. Do we have any other elected officials here? I believe I have seen any. Okay. Board members, a policy review meeting has been scheduled for Friday, November 18th at 9 a.m. in this Summer Place boardroom. I also believe we have some special guests here this evening. Ms. Henderson, would you like to introduce our Hardin Valley Academy students?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so excited that Ms. Cheryl is here with her class. We have some students here from HVA, Teaching as a Profession. And Teaching as a Profession is a 4-course pathway designed for students who are interested in working in the education field. The students here tonight are level 3 and 4 students. The Teaching as a Profession students are trained in classrooms as well as in the field to be our future teachers. They are here tonight to observe how decisions are made on a district level, and we couldn't be more excited to have you guys here. Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for Ms. Cheryl for all she does for her students as well.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Before we get started on our agenda items, I want to remind everyone in attendance tonight that the Board of Education's public meetings are the only opportunity we have to discuss items that become before us as an elected body. Please refrain from applause, cheers, groans, booing, and or conversations with others in the audience, as this can be very distracting during our discussion. If you do feel the need to have a conversation with someone sitting next to you, we ask that you step outside to do so. Any Knox County resident can sign up to address the board during public forums, so please be mindful of this. And we certainly don't want to ask anyone to leave, but we do have to be respectful of our time and conversations as a board. So with that being said, are there any requested changes to this agenda? Ms. Spike? Yeah, if you'll turn it on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to request a change. I motion to move Mr. Sam McKenzie, Representative McKenzie, which is somewhat in conjunction with the 3rd grade retention resolution, but we don't have to move that whole discussion, but just for timeliness on his part to be moved up under the superintendent's report.
So to add him to the agenda to speak outside of public forum?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a request by Ms. Spike to add Mr. McKenzie up to, you said under the superintendent's report, right after that, and a second by Mr. Watson. So is there any discussion on that? Okay. So okay, so all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote, Ms. Cutney.
Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Ms. Owen?
Aye.
Mr. Watson?
Aye.
Ms. Bike?
Aye.
Ms. Horn? Mr. Triplett? Mr. McMillan? No. Ms. Henderson?
No.
Ms. Christie?
I'll pass.
That's 4 yes votes, 4 no votes, and a pass vote. Ms. Christie, did you want to change your pass?
No. So the motion fails. Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the agenda as it is? So motion by Mr. Watson, a second by Mr. McMillan. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. Superintendent Ricewick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have some brief updates since our last meeting. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to Ms. Lindsay Lewis, a sixth grade math teacher at Cedar Bluff Middle School, for allowing me to spend half a day in her classroom with her last week. Ms. Lewis is a district-wide demonstration teacher who teaches, I said before, I think sixth grade math, who's really taken our ZERN curriculum. I'd never seen it in action. I'd heard a lot about it, but it was great to be able to get out and see it. Was a fantastic teacher. Let me stay through her bus duty, first and second block, and I actually got to have lunch with the teachers as well with that sixth grade team. A great time to be able just to answer questions they have and spend a little time seeing what things look like in the classroom. So just left very confident with great teachers like Ms. Lewis in the classroom. I really think the needle's going to move for our students in math. And again, she's phenomenal, and the team there does a great job. So just want to give her a shout out for letting me spend time with her. I'd also like to take a minute to acknowledge another successful coupon book campaign. On Friday, I got the chance to attend the official coupon book celebrations, which was held at Main Event, and recognize the district's top sellers. Ms. Bella Courtney from Powell Middle School was the top overall seller this year. The campaign raised over $1.2 million. I think the goal was $1 million, so to have $1.2 million come in. And so this was just a great for our community to show how successful they can be, the students working hard and the parents to support, and the community also for buying those coupon books. Also want to thank the folks who participated in that from the business sector, from the restaurants to the merchants to the other partners. Really makes a difference in the school. Just excited too, and just so everyone knows that, the books were $10. The full $10 went to the school, so there was no money that was taken back. So the school it was purchased at, those dollars went back there, and it was great to hear lots of folks that were thankful for that opportunity, but really we're thankful for the community at large who continues to support that effort to bring in those dollars to our school. Finally, I just want to remind everyone that tomorrow is Election Day, and students will not be in school. Teachers will be attending system-wide in-service meetings. Thank you also to Chris Davis and the Election Commission. We often forget to thank them because during election time, we do share the building, and we really work hard with them to make sure that we've given them what they need and the parking they need and the facilities that they need to do that. So we're appreciative. They're always helpful for us to be able to do that. So please consider voting if you haven't already, and we look forward to seeing students back on November the 9th. And Madam Chair, that concludes my report for the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Ricewick. All right, board members, so moving into our regular session agenda, are there any comments or is there any discussion on items 5A or B? All right. Are we good? Okay. Item C, items and contracts, 1 or 2. Three or 4. Mr. Watson?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. My question is actually about C1.
Okay.
Mr. Ricewick, Dr. Ricewick, I know that there was it even said in the report that we got that there was a little bit of confusion. I think at the beginning of the year is probably fair to say. I think the district, and I don't know how many districts across the state, interpreted the law to just mean our classic libraries and schools, not individual classrooms themselves. In that legislation, did Tennessee provide any additional funding for the effort that it's going to take to catalog classroom libraries?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Watson. To my knowledge, and I look at Dr. Wilson, okay, I didn't think we had, I wasn't aware of any. So they have not. And if I could expand a little bit on the one,
yeah.
So we did report on that we were not in compliance with that law
right.
to date. And you've done a good job framing that. Our understanding was that it was going to be for school-level libraries, and we were prepared and did comply with that.
The classroom sets were not ones that we thought of. So we did actually write, inform the board to a letter to the commissioner, not want to put undue pressure on the teachers. So they had, the lead time to be able to get that done and have that to where our goal now is spring break of next year for them to, or excuse me, of the following semester to get that done. So if she received the letter and just said, make sure we report that in the compliance report that we're not fully compliant with that law. But there should, to our knowledge, there won't be penalties for that.
Yeah, and from my understanding from the implementation that you all lined out, I thought that was pretty specific, which I appreciated. But it sounds like there's going to be time and energy and effort, at least on the software implementation. We are probably going to be implementing some new platform to do this. Is that correct?
I probably defer to Dr. Wilson on that. He knows the details more than I do on that.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. So yes, there are several different, I think, options out there for tech platforms. I know Dr. Ricewick had been to a superintendent's conference earlier in the year and had several districts that had shared different examples of that. What Sarah Searles and her team have been doing is pulling librarians and teachers together and looking at different resources that are available and getting feedback from them about systems that would be the most beneficial and kind of efficient for doing that work. And so they've really been in that feedback collection phase right now and trying to look at some different models that might work for that as they move forward. And as I laid out, and that was her timeline that she provided on those things in the compliance report.
Yeah, so there will be some additional costs both on the software implementation side, but also labor side from teachers and or others who are helping to do that cataloging, correct?
Yeah, I don't know obviously the exact lift on that, and certainly on the tools either, the types of resources we would have to acquire to do that, but could certainly get more information on the directions.
Well, and there's probably going to be some startup, some costs, and some ongoing costs long term, right?
Potentially. I think what we're seeing this as like long term is more kind of an inventorying process, so that once we get it up and established, if we do have technological resources that we're using to do that, it'd just be a matter of updating that periodically at the school level.
Yeah, so the lift is probably more on the front end than ongoing.
I think we think so.
Yeah, so, and I don't want to add to that lift, but I think it would be good for the board and our legislators, honestly, to understand some of what the cost is associated with that lift. I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time trying to document time.
Sure.
But I think it's good for our legislators to understand. I think there's always unintended consequences, right? I don't know that this law was passed with the intent of let's burden our teachers with, but that's going to be a result of it. And I think it's important for us to be able to help tell that story in terms of Knox County schools and what is the specific burden that's putting on our system in order to do that. So.
Okay. Be happy to do a capture on that.
Thank you.
Ms. Horn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Keith, I'm curious, the library collections at the school level, are those accessible to parents yet, or is that also available?
Are you referring to the classroom libraries?
Not the classroom library, the school level,
Yes,
so the school library.
The school level libraries have been in compliance actually even prior to this law change.
Okay.
Each school has a publicly accessible catalog that's searchable for that school.
Okay.
And so if you go to the main pages, typically at the top under like students or staff, or not staff, but students or families, you'll find a tab and it's usually there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So moving on to items and contracts, item 2. Item 3. Four. Five. Item 6. 7. Ms. Horn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about this, the purpose of the original contract and whether the partnership has been fruitful, if schools are using it, and also just, I think it sounded like that the data being shared will not be tied to students, so I just wanted to make sure that's the case, and what the purpose of the amendment. Just if you can explain, so there's 2 different questions. One would be the purpose of the amendment, but then also just whether the original contract is being utilized by school and whether it's been fruitful so far, because I think it's been around since for just a little over a year or a year and a half.
So I tried to touch base today with Shannon Jackson a little bit because she had a lot more history on this than I did. It appears, again, that the amendment to the contract is related into how we're sharing data with this. And I think, again, the contract in its original inception had to do with our schools that were participating with the the Literacy Improvement Network, the LIN network. And so there was some data on the back end, of course, that TNTP would need to show the impact of that work and those sorts of things. And again, in talking with Shannon today, it seemed like last year when we shared data at the end of the year, that data share was with the state directly, and that there's a change in that the data is actually going to TNTP through this contract and agreement rather than being passed through the state. So I think that's the change with the contract. I will call Dr. Phillips up, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about the schools that are currently working with that, because she had a chance to touch base with several principals today.
Thank you.
Oh, that button. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I had the privilege to talk to a few principals today about their work with TNCP. Currently, we have 5 middle schools participating in the LIN work, which is centered around literacy implementation within our high-quality instructional materials framework. And I spoke to Mr. Champion at Whittle Springs. He spoke very, very highly of their collaboration. He said that with their support, they're doing instructional walkthroughs to look through the lens of how high-quality instructional material implementation is going in their building, and really streamlining the work in alignment with their goals around literacy and improving literacy. So all of our middle schools that are participating in that work are walking a very similar path. I also spoke with Mr. Smith at Fulton. So this is an additional lens of TNTP work. He's partnered with TNCP over last year and this year, focused on math and ELA work that's grounded in his instructional goals for school-wide improvement and achievement. He has specific on-site visits that happen there, and he said that his administrative team has been wrapped in support through his partnership with TNCP, and he feels like the work is extremely beneficial and invaluable to their work. I also spoke with Ms. Foster at Maynard, and she's partnered with TNCP as part of a turnaround support structure to really invest in analyzing what the needs are at Maynard to see continued improvement opportunities and to build their administrative team up in recognizing what high-quality literacy instruction looks like in the classroom. And so she spoke very highly of their partnership and is excited about future collaboration.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So any more discussion on item 7? Moving on to item 8. Item 9. 10. 11. Ms. Horn.
Thank you. Me again. Thank you. Question on this one. I know this contract is always an issue for Gary, and I noticed you have not signed it, Mr. Dupler. So I'm not sure if all the other board members are aware of that. So that's one issue. I'm wondering, Mr. Wilson, if the IB program has been beneficial to Beard Middle School, if we've seen impact at Beard Middle or even at West because of that program.
Thank you, Ms. Horn. So again, I think when you look at the assessment, but we'll give Gary a chance to sign tonight if he wants to, by the way. Just always want to give him that last opportunity. But no, I think when you look at sort of the what should we be looking for out of this model between the middle years program and the IB program, it really is about giving schools a framework to help students begin thinking about and begin accessing those early post-secondary opportunities. So if you look at it through the lens more of, students moving through the middle years program and into the high school IB program, it really would be, I guess, the place to look at most of the data would be in that college and career, early post-secondary exposure type frame and lens. In doing that, as I mentioned to you earlier today, I did ask our REA department to go back and pull some information in regards to that. And if you looked back historically from 2016 to the last year, and we've definitely seen pretty significant increases both in IB participation, which is really the advanced model that they carry there, as well as the industry certifications, because West has started not only the diploma side of their program, but now have added the career program, which is very not that dissimilar, honestly, from what we've talked about in the academy work of building out those pathways, those defined course sets, and giving students that exposure. So again, seen a lot of seen significant increases in student exposure to the EPSOs. Their graduation rate, actually, if you looked back to 2016, was about 3.5 points below the district average. It's now about a point higher in the last academic year. A little bit of noise, if you look at that, as it was anybody else with that 2020, 2021, 2022, some fluctuations in there. But definitely, as you look at the trends over time, I think we've seen impact there. The percent of students that are above the 21 on the ACT between 2016 and 21 has increased over 7%. So again, I think if you're looking at the end range of how we begin to get students interested in and then plugged into appropriate academic work, I think there's some indicators there. It's hard to prove causality with anything, but some indicators that over the past 5-6 years or so that they've seen some growth in that area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the fiscal note, it seems much lower than I recall. And so I'm wondering if there are other costs associated, like staffing and scheduling and that kind of thing, that are not included in this fiscal note.
I'm not aware of any specific additional staffing costs, but I am also pretty new to the IB world. So I think if Shannon's here, I'll have her come on up and talk about that piece. Thank you.
Now I'm on? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So you are correct. Initially, there was some overstaffing to launch the Bearden Middle and West High School programs. But by the time Bearden Middle was coming on board, they had earned their staffing. So they're within ratio of the other schools. So we really are down to $80,000 covers the fees for Bearden Middle and West High, and also gives the schools an allocation for professional development so that the teachers who are coming into the school or making a program change have an opportunity to get professional development for IB. So we really are at a pretty good equilibrium as far as staffing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Leave it on.
All right. So any other discussion on that item? Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And since Ms. Hord mentioned it, I figured I would enlighten the board members as to why I haven't signed it. And I'll say this up front. I mean, there's a difference between me not signing and me saying, heck no, don't do this, which I would say, positively. But not in this case, because in this case, just like when IB came up the first time, there's no problem. The program has an excellent reputation, and there's many fans of the program. The only reason that our office is unable to sign on the agreement is that it's just not in the form that we routinely accept for Knox County schools. So in other words, if something were to go really wrong with the program, then really Knox County Schools' recourse is to get out of the program. I mean, that's about it. Because our office, as much as I'd like to, I mean, we're not going to travel to Sweden to fight it out in their court. And there's a number of other issues, I mean, similar to that nature. So that's why I haven't signed it. But the board has accepted the IB program in the past, obviously. And if the board feels like it's a good idea today, then you all have at it. So, but I just wanted to give that caveat.
Thank you. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Dupler, I'm assuming that means the board has accepted in the past without your signature, correct? Okay, thank you.
All right, so any other discussion? Okay, so moving on to board policy 6A. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just remind members of the board and the public that this change to our credit recovery policy is required by law because the law changed around how much credit could be given. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. All right, so moving on to grants, 7. Item A. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make sure that I was reading it correctly. It sounds like maybe in the grant that last year was the first year we were able to offer school-based threat assessments. I'm just want to verify that yeah, last year was the first year, but also want somebody to speak a little bit to the local match. And also, I know there's some new things in there around implementing a gang prevention program and a community liaison. So is Chief here? Can you speak to that or some? There you go. Hello, sir.
So I can speak to the community liaison position. The local match, Dr. Denton would be the expert on that. But as far as the community liaison position, this is a new approach that myself and Janice Cook came up with. The approach was to have a position that bridges the two divisions of the school district to ensure that we have community outreach for more parent contact. And I mean that by the position being something that goes out, does community response, goes out and talks to parents about gang awareness, you know, is a person that has directly reports to me so that they'll be able to come back and tell me what are the concerns the community has. And they'll also be out there to work with report through to school culture to make sure that counselors have awareness training, you know, for gangs and things like that. So this came out of our strategy last year where we were looking at solutions around the community for gang intervention and things like that. So this position is kind of the first time we've tried to bridge the security division and school culture, much like we did with the transportation safety officer position. So it has a very unique reporting so that we can have a much more connected connection to the parents and the school district as a whole.
Thank you. In the beginning, I thought I heard you say to bridge the two divisions of Knox County Schools, but that's
no. Yeah,
okay.
The position bridges both divisions.
Okay, between Knox County Schools and the community.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then is there any other elements to kind of a gang intervention program that we're implementing at this point? Is there anything that's direct? This person sounds like they're mainly integrating and connecting with the community at large, mainly through parents, but is there anything that's happening within Knox County Schools directly with students around gang intervention or prevention?
Yeah, so that person will help develop gang awareness training for both counselors, our security folks, and with staff members. So the person's gonna be connecting all of those resources to the.
But this staff member won't necessarily interact directly with students.
They could.
They could. Okay,
they
potentially.
Could, yes, absolutely.
And is your department working at all with the police department or other entities within the community at large who are also doing gang intervention activities?
No,
are you all
this is
coordinating
something,
these efforts at this point?
No, sir. This is something unique to our district.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. All right, any other discussion on that item? Okay, moving on in grants, item B. Item C. Item D. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I've got this question associated with the right grant. I may be off one. Can somebody speak generally to the purpose of the grant? And I have a specific question about the logic model that's presented on page 8 around the whole child support team. Ms. Cook, can you help me with this?
I hope so.
I guess first, can you just speak generally to the
grant.
grant and what you're hoping to accomplish with it, and then I've got a specific question about the logic model.
Okay, so this is a grant that was, excuse me, it was a pass-through grant from, I think, the Department of Health to the Department of Education. And they sent out this grant, and it had three main components to it. You could apply for funding for making your school a trauma-informed school district-wide, which we did not really qualify for because we already have district-wide trauma-informed practices in our schools. The second component was that you could apply to expand the services that you have. So we applied for some monies for that area. And then the third one was to facilitate mental health supports. So we applied for that portion of it. So what you did with this grant was you sent in what you would like, and they collected up all the people who had applied for the grants. You could apply up to $250,000, which we applied for, and then they said, depending on who applies, then we'll tell you how much money you get. And then you have to go back and change what you've written.
Right.
So the person at the State Department, when I spoke to them, they said, this grant is a bit like, I feel like I'm playing a board game with my children where they keep changing the rules. So that's why if you look at the amount of the grant, it's a very strange amount. I don't know how they came up with that very strange amount.
Right.
But then we had to go back and modify what we had down. You couldn't really change anything. You just had to eliminate things under certain sections. So that's what we did. We looked to say for sections 2 and 3, we are doing district-wide trauma-informed practices. So let's look and see how we can focus, because this money is only available from now until June. So it's short-term money. What can we do to support some of our students to really target? So we looked at our homeless population, our foster children, and our ELL children. So really for us, when we're looking at that second section, is what are we going to do to support those? And we're going to work with community agencies to support those. One of the things we had looked to do was provide translators.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, they said, no, you have to take that back out the grant. So we're going to work with our partners to see exactly how we can support best those three populations specifically.
Yeah. I don't have the numbers. I didn't pull them out, but it looked like there was a pretty significant increase in our students experiencing homelessness and our foster students, correct?
Yes.
I mean, pretty drastic increase
yes.
over that. So I kind of geek out on logic models. I appreciate the work on that. And I know that there's an output measure around the activities that speaks to the whole child support teams. This is on page 8 of the whole child support team row. I'll let you get to it.
So I don't know whether
It's at least on page 8 on my version of it. I don't.
Yeah, it may not be on the same. What does it say?
Well, it's the logic model, and it's the row that speaks to the activity of the whole child support teams, which I know the board's had a lot of conversation about recently. And there's an outcome measure in there in terms of reducing absenteeism by 1% and reducing school suspensions by 4%.
Yeah.
Is that you're there? So
Yes.
Is this version of the grant the stripped down version that you all have kind of renegotiated with the state?
So this part, they just left this part as is.
Okay, so this
They
didn't
just
change?
left, no. That was with the original. All they wanted us to do when they stripped it down was take out people or take out, things.
Sure.
But that was, we worked with Dr. Norton to put this together, because this is seemingly, I think, we'll see a lot of the grants from the state now having this model that you have to work through.
Yeah, and I've not been involved in a lot of state level grants, so I'm not sure what their process is, but I know in some grants you have to produce a logic model up front, but you don't necessarily have to report on the back end. Are we going to be required as a part of this logic model to report both our absenteeism and suspension data relative to this particular outcome metric?
I do not know the answer to that question. I'm not sure that the state knows the answer to that question. Like we don't have how we're going to have to report out to that at this point in time.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking the question is because in our October board meeting, we talked a lot about suspension data, and we had a lot of conversation about perception of that in Knox County schools and with administrators and things like that. But we're obviously using that as a metric in some of our grant applications, including this one. And so I think more for the community than anything, I just want to, I wanted to try to understand if at least through this grant, we're still tracking that and we'll be reporting on that at some level, and what the expectation is for that.
So part of the expectation for the chronic absenteeism, we're hoping that providing some support for students, for these targeted groups,
right.
and also in the third component, which was providing someone to help support mental health and facilitation of that will be able to reduce some of these disparities that we have here with our suspensions and attendance.
Yeah, well, thank you. I just want to say again, really appreciate you and your department and all the work that you guys are doing within Knox County Schools and helping us meet our children where they are. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. All right, so moving on to item E. Item F. Item G. H. I. J. K. L. Moving into contracts, item A. Item B. Item C. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a contract for our intercom installation and repair services. I think most people feel like the phrase intercom is kind of outdated, like there's not many new implementations of intercom systems. I know that people use them in our school systems all the time now. I'm just curious from a technology standpoint, does Knox County Schools at some point see us getting away from a traditional intercom system? Are we going to be leveraging other platforms in the future as new technologies get developed?
Mr. or Dr. Adams is.
I'm actually going to ask Freddie to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Cox.
Madam Chair, Mr. Watson. So this obviously is primarily for maintenance and support of the existing systems that we have. Looking forward, yes, there are many innovations that we can look at, but part of our life safety plan, having some variety in how we communicate in the school is beneficial. So while we have individual phones in the classroom, we have electronic ways to communicate. Sometimes it is best to have a traditional paging system that may work separately from some of the existing systems that we have, but integrate with. So we want to have that available. Should the internet go down, we don't want the paging system to quit working. So these systems offer us some variety to support what we have and then look forward. But right now, there is no plan to replace existing systems.
No, it's good. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the way you articulated that and the need to have systems that are redundant, that are acting on one another. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. All right, moving to regular agenda items. 9A, our Emerald Academy Charter School Evaluation Report. Is this, any discussion on that? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know Mr. Diggs is here. I'm not sure if others are here. I'm wondering if somebody could speak just generally to it. So the copy of the report that we got just wasn't a good copy. It was kind of hard to read. And I'm not necessarily asking somebody to come up and deliver a PowerPoint, but if somebody could summarize the report, that would be great.
Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, actually, probably before I would call Steve up, which we'd love to have him come up, but before I would do that, I'd ask Julie Thompson to come up and share.
That's great. Yeah, whoever's best, thank you.
Huh?
So we completed this evaluation based on information from last year, and then it runs from October 1 to October 1. And as you can see, the evaluation document has been revised from previous years. The previous years it had that one sheet that was very difficult to read. And so as part of our authorizer evaluation, because we have an evaluation for each individual school, but then we're also evaluated as how well we are doing in authorizing charter schools. And so some of the feedback that we got from our evaluation was that didn't work, that wasn't a good tool. And so there was a committee that spent some extensive time revising the performance framework from the state, and the document that you have before you now is the one that we utilized. So this is our first year using it, although we're using the same information to evaluate them this year that we did last year. But it is more detailed and gives you a lot more information. The good news is that Emerald has met all expectations. Now, they are not unlike Knox County schools. They struggle with chronic absenteeism, and they had issues during the pandemic just like we did. And but we have met with them. We had a site visit last week, and we've offered support to them, and they've been very open. I'm very pleased with the relationship that we have forged with them, and they're very receptive to doing what's best for their children. And so we're working hard to support them in whatever they need. So we have several departments that are working closely with Emerald to provide the support that they need. But
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. That's helpful. It didn't feel like the same tool that we've gotten in the past,
right,
and so
it's different.
I appreciate.
And actually, the sheet that you all had last year is embedded in that document, but you can actually read it this year because the template there is just a larger version of that,
right.
So you'll be able to see what the rubric.
So this is more exhaustive.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. So, any other discussion on that item? All right. Moving on to item 9B. Ms. Bite?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that everyone has had a chance to read this, and I've worked with Mr. Gary Dupler on this, and who helped so much, and as well as other people. And as a mother of a child that reading didn't quite click until 5th grade, this is something that is very close to me, but also now as a mother of a 3rd grader who has never been through state testing, also hits home for me, as well as knowing so many other parents that have 3rd graders, speaking to many 3rd grade teachers, 4th grade teachers, 5th grade teachers about some of these issues. And I've put this together, and I've also worked with Representative McKenzie, who's here, who I'd like to ask to speak on this.
So we have him signed up. Actually, did we sign him up? Okay, so he is signed up to speak.
Yeah, he just has some information that might be pertinent to this conversation. Do we need to wait?
So since we took the vote at the beginning, I mean, I think if we asked to take a vote, it might end up in the same results, if that makes sense. I mean, we can ask for, but since we've already done that, I don't know that the end result would be.
Sure, I just thought it was a part of this conversation.
Point of order, if I might. In the past, when a board member has had someone to speak on an item, that has never been denied. So it concerns me that that would be denied in this instance. Mr. Dupler, can you speak to that at all?
I don't know, I know that in the past, board members have requested individuals to come up and speak. I do not recall whether it's never been denied, so I can't confirm that or not. But I do know that that's been allowed in the past when board members have requested. And then obviously if the board votes on it, then, but that, I think that's Ms. Christie's point, is that the board voted on it earlier, so, you know, I don't know that I can shed much light on this one, to be honest.
It was my understanding that the vote earlier was whether to change the order and allow him to speak at the beginning of the agenda, because he was planned to speak on something that's much later in the agenda. So that vote, I think we're voting on something different.
Okay. Well,
And that's fair. I mean, I do feel like that is different, and he is signed up to speak anyway, so if there aren't any objections, I feel like we probably should go ahead and let him speak to this item. Well, we would hear him now and not at public forum. Yeah. So, I mean, if there aren't any strong objections, I do agree with Ms. Owen and do think it would be appropriate to let him speak now. All right. Representative McKenzie, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Dang, is it my voice tone? School Board Member McMillan? No, seriously, thank you all for allowing me to just spend a brief amount of time just talking about this issue. Just to, you know, it's been a while since I've addressed this august body, but just for historical purposes, I was first co-chair of the Joint Education Committee, where we had half county commission and half school board members. So education is extremely important and valuable to me, and has been, being a product of Knox County schools. You know, and to cut to the issue, we had a special session in Nashville shortly after I took office to talk about education and what we were going to do. Some really meaty issues, and one of them was this third grade retention process, and I really dug into it. And again, much to the chagrin of my party, the Democratic Party, I voted for this. So I want to be clear to you all, I voted for this when we were in session, and I support this in general. Now, will this adversely affect African-American students and students of color? Yes, it will. I think the numbers will probably prove themselves out in Knox County and other places to do that. But I think it's worth it. It's worth it in terms of not pushing our students on that really aren't reading. And there's several measures that are in place that is that's going to really help this third grade retention process move forward if done properly. And I have every confidence that you guys will do that. Again, the benefits are worth it. Now, with all that said, and with my vote, and please go out and research it, this resolution is a good one. Knoxville is not like Memphis. Knox County is not like Bledsoe County or Hardeman County or Morgan County. You all have a responsibility to educate a bunch more students than most of those counties that I pointed out. All of those counties probably combined, the counties. So things need to be different. Things need to sit into your bailiwick. And so you all should and must be able to have some autonomy. That's a lot of what I push. Governance should happen at its closest level to our students and our parents and our guardians. And that's where you guys come in. We set a good template, but sometimes we don't get it right. I guarantee you TISA will not, we didn't get it right the first time. There's going to be some tweaks to it, just like this bill that we passed. Again, I voted for it because it's a good bill, but this resolution is a good one as well. If you all have some tweaks to it, by all means, please make it Knox County doable and livable to be able to work it out. But the fact that that you have no control over whether Johnny or Sally moves on, to me makes no sense. You don't want that to be a blanket. Blankets rarely work. So again, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, and I'm definitely willing. I don't know if there's iterative process, but I definitely will sit here I'll stay here as long as I need to. But I just want to point that out and ask you all to really consider this resolution, passing it.
All right. Thank you, Representative McKenzie. Reverend Butler, did you? Oh, okay. Ms. Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just found the timing of this resolution a little politically driven, the fact that it's coming up the night before an election. I suggest we move this to December and put it as part of our legislative priorities.
It looks like, Mr. Watson, you were first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to default to Ms. Bike. I think she
Okay.
was kind of addressed in that comment.
All right.
So,
Ms. Bike?
I will say that I definitely, this was just the next one. This was something that I've been working on for 2 months, and I think we can go back through emails with Gary and other people, and it just so happened that this one happened to be close to election night. I'd really like this to be something that we get taken care of so that we can all, especially with the emails that I've gotten from parents, we can all kind of rest with it.
Mr. Watson?
thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an issue that I've heard brought up a lot, even dating back to TSBA's conference last year, which is about to happen again next week. I believe this is correct. Even TSBA at that point in time passed a similar resolution. You know, I know different delegates probably voted different ways, but the majority of TSBA delegates did pass and approve a very similar resolution. I am curious about the now therefore language. Ms. Pike, can you share who spoke to that particular language? I just want to make sure that whatever that we're pushing, if this gets passed and whatever we push to our legislators, that the particular language around the information we would want to use to help make those decisions is specific and informed by our central administration. So.
As far as specific information that we would use, that's something, and that Mr. Dupler also brought up, that that's hard to determine, and I think that even in, you know, the way we're seeing it, so that I'm open to that being collaborative in deciding what that needs to be.
So the intent then of the resolution is not to spell out specific types of information we might use locally, but to more just put it back in the hands of us locally to say, allow Knox County schools to use whatever information it deems necessary to make that decision for a given child or for all children?
All children.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to be clear because I think the version that I read at TSBA was a little bit more specific, like it called out specific types of data we would have access to.
Yes. And I guess when I mean all children, I mean the data for all of Knox County children, not
Right.
just a specific subset. So, you know, like the ELL students and students with IEPs and stuff like that, we know that we have plenty of students that are not diagnosed and don't have IEPs for whatever reason, and I want to make sure that we're including those students as well.
Sure. And right. And that basically it sounds like the intent is that locally we would be able to take a whole child perspective and consider
Yes.
all the specifics around that particular child in making that decision. And we would have more information or data about that specific child than just state level data is the intent, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's really important that the board understands that when we're looking at the test data that determines whether a student would be retained, we're not looking at all of their TCAP scores. This law requires that they are retained based only on their English language arts portion, which is just one tiny part of that test even. So not only the first time that they're taking this test, but only that one little portion. So basically, if we look at the over 1,000 hours a student would spend in school, this little 30 minutes of their life is what determines whether they would be retained, with no input from the teachers or the parents or medical professionals or anyone else who would be able to determine what intervention is actually needed if a student is having academic difficulty. So when we're looking at this, we need to really understand that we're not looking at their test over all their subjects. We're not looking at their performance over all their subjects. This requires retention based only on that one little tiny portion of the TCAP test. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Spike?
I just also want to add that our third graders right now were kindergartners when the world shut down and they didn't get a full kindergarten year of normalcy. And my son is in third grade this year, and certainly watching him walk through this and some of the stuff that he's still struggling with, and that this will be the first time he and his peers will have taken a test like this. I don't know how he's going to do, and I don't know how the other third graders are going to do, and this is the first class of that. So I think that is a special consideration as well.
Reverend Butler?
I'd like to ask, what is the impact as the law stands based on where we were last year, or the most recent data? What percentage of our kids across the district would be retained?
Thank you, Ms. Christie. Thank you, Mr. Butler. So typically we run around third grade, run around 40% proficient by these standards as well. And so if this were to be in effect, we're probably talking about 2,600 to 2,700 students who could be affected in third grade. Now, again, the other side of that from the state, so that means those students would have to either attend the summer session at a 90% rate, which is a 20-day session for like a summer bridge, and or depending on how, not to complicate it too much, but there's two kind of categories you fall into if you're not proficient. One would be below, and that's kind of the bottom of the state. Those students would have to do both, attend a summer program, the summer bridge, 18 of the 20 days have to have 90% attendance, and have a tutor in the fourth grade that will be with them during that time. If you're in that next level, which is approaching the level right under proficient, then it's an either or choice for those families at that point to either attend the summer or to do the tutor in fourth grade. So, but we were thinking around, again, historically around that 40% range, so probably about 2,600 students.
So, and what I'm understanding is you're talking about what the current law is, would be that number of students.
Correct. Under the current law, the way the current law reads now about who would be, again, because it's every student who's not proficient, and so those would be those two categories of students who aren't. That's roughly about 60%, give or take, in different years of our students in third grade who are not.
And so of those who would have to go through the summer school and the other qualifications, how many of those, or what percentage could be projected based on your experience to stay in the third grade?
Well, so, and I may have Dr. Norton weigh in on just a second too, but so there's a couple things with this. So there's some things like the student would have to show improvement that's in the law. So, you know, pre-test, post-test, that kind of thing. We don't have that test. The state would produce that test for us to be able to look at some of those things. So we're not totally in control of the level of growth they would have to show over the course of the summer. But if it were to be just attending those, that would be based on, I would say, let me say it this way. I'd say last year there wasn't a great attendance in all of our summer camps, and we weren't required to be as stringent on the attendance. So this law lays out very specifically 90%. So this past summer, when students may have attended Summer Bridge, you know, they may have missed 3 days or 4 days, and we were fine to have them come back in to get the intervention. I think, you know, this year is much more stringent as far as if you fall into that. If you do miss over, if you don't attend 90% of the time, then you would not be able, and it wouldn't count, you'd be retained. So this law, as it's currently written, does not give us wiggle room outside of those two contingencies. Dr. Norton, I don't know if you'd add to that, but.
The only thing I would add is that it's really going to be dependent upon students having access to the interventions, so the summer school and the tutoring, and then how effective those are over the course of the year, and then how the Department of Education decides to define what adequate progress is. So that's the last piece we're looking for in terms of guidance from the department, is that definition of adequate progress that would determine whether or not a student who has gone through those interventions meets the criteria for advancement to the next grade.
And one last thing, thank you so much. One last thing, so those students who are retained in the third grade, do you anticipate, based on the current law, that it'll be more than what has been in the past, and that would complicate your student enrollment in the third grade across the district, perhaps?
Thank you, Mr. Butler. No, I mean, again, not having gone through this yet, but I think your logic is smart, right? So, I mean, if you've got a group identified, we've never identified 2,600 third graders to be retained. I mean, typically, the situation that was described earlier about kind of that local control, looking at multiple data points, you know, having input from teachers in the school about where the student is. You know, retention has not been a strategy we've used in Knox County schools for students to be successful. So we usually, that number is quite low that we do retain. We do on certain times do that, but it's not at the rate of 2,600 students.
Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question in reference to what Ms. Owen said about, she made it sound so simple that like anybody could just look at it and decide whether it applied or not. But is that true, or do they use teams, or who actually decides?
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. As the law is currently written, it is based on that TCAP score that is in English language arts. So for third graders who are not proficient on that test, when those scores come back, it is, if they weren't proficient, then they would be retained unless they choose one of these two interventions, or in some cases both if they score low. So there is kind of that, in the law, prescribed cut of where that happens.
Okay, and I understand that makes total sense, but you know, I think we can all agree that we're for anything that any program that would teach people to read, as far as, and they shouldn't go past the third grade before they have conquered that, so to speak. Because if you can't read, you know, you can't. It limits you on so many other things that you can do. So you need to learn to read adequately before you move on, in my opinion. Thank you.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Representative McKenzie, thank you for coming and speaking. It really helps me to know that you voted for it. I don't know that I would have guessed that for a lot of different reasons, so I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm not trying to, my assumption is that one of the reasons why this law got traction is it's basically an opportunity to encourage very strongly for parents to take initiative with their students based upon where they are, right? Because it's not they're just retained like you articulated. It's they will be retained if now you don't do this, right? And so it's for right or wrong, it's a way to motivate parents to take action in the life of their kids. And from what I understand about this proposed resolution is this resolution doesn't speak to any of that. It really just speaks to what is the information we're able to use to make the decision whether or not a child is going down that path of possibly being retained and or needing these interventions. And I think the premise that, and Ms. Bike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the premise that she's using is that certainly our educators locally would know better for each individual specific child if they have the capacity and the aptitude to do just what Mr. McMillan is saying, which is read at a third grade level. So, Dr. Roswick, Mr. Butler brought out, I think, some good logistical concerns about, you know, what would it mean if we retain, let's say, even 500 third graders, you know, next year. Can you speak to, from an educator's perspective and also the superintendent of this district, can you speak to your feelings, not about the specific resolution, but about the need for us to have some more autonomy locally to be able to make that decision and set that bar? Do you feel like that's important, or do you feel like relying on the current law, the way it's worded from just TCAP scores, do you think that'll work and have the desired effect? I think this is like a lot of different laws, and nobody can fully understand what all those unintended consequences are, but I think there will be some unintended consequences, and I think that's probably what the point is being raised tonight. So.
No, thank you, Mr. Watson. I think, let me say this first, and then I want to answer the question. 40% proficiency, even though it's the highest of all the urban districts, is not acceptable, and we know that, and we made that clear, and you guys have as a board as well. So, we do need to continue to come up with strategies to work on that, and I think we will. So I think you articulated well what my understanding from what the legislators were trying to do, and I think Representative McKenzie said the same thing in his talk. So I think we've seen the state be pretty stagnant for a long period of time, and I think this was exactly what you're alluding to. Retention in and of itself has no research to show that it is a strategy that students get better at. Just a student being a year older doesn't all of a sudden make that happen. So I think that is what they were intending, was that it's probably the stick or the teeth in the movement to say these early interventions are where the best shot for students are. And so I think both of the things you just named, the tutoring and the summer kind of bridge program with those extra days to work on skills, I think that's kind of where the best shot for those students is. So I do think that was the intent. I do think that the legislators, again, Representative McKenzie said that as well, that's what they were looking at when they voted for that. I have heard from Representative McKenzie and other representatives too that say that they understand some of the things that you're alluding to, that there are other consequences that could come from this. And I totally expect from my conversations with them that they will take this back up in session at some point and look at some things. I don't know how that'll play out. We never know how that plays out when those things happen. But I've heard from multiple ones who are listening saying they're hearing and seeing that. So I would say, again, back to the stance, retention in and of itself is not a research-based strategy that makes people better at that. So I don't know that we need a state law to do that. I do think we need earlier interventions, and we do know things to happen. I think when other states, I think Mississippi and Florida are two other states that have done that. I haven't read their studies, but I have been told that there's not been, that it does do just what you've alluded to there, that families do tend to say, we don't want our student to be retained, so we do this. Maybe we don't go to Disney World, we do this, that kind of thing. Is that good or bad? I don't know. If their reading percent's gone up, I haven't studied that to see that, but it feels like that's kind of the model that Tennessee's looking at. So again, I applaud that the state's providing those extra resources for us to do that. I don't know that retention's the answer, and to tell you the truth, we won't know until the end, so it's hard for us to plan. I think if this law doesn't change, our hope would be that families do take advantage of one or both of those interventions so their students not retained, because it could, if no one went, it could cause some interesting challenges on, you'd have smaller fourth graders, smaller fourth grade classes, larger third grade classes, and those sorts of things that could play out. So, would it to that degree? I don't know, because we haven't been through it yet.
Yeah, so I agree. I think we all want parents to take that initiative, or other caregivers. So for me, it was my grandmother. I went to kindergarten twice, because the first time I didn't learn the ABCs, and my grandmother said, you are, during this summer, right? So she made it happen for me, which was great. But so the one part of the question that I'm not quite sure that you touched on was, do you believe it's important for our local district to be able to have more autonomy in deciding how that child is assessed against the bar? Or is TCAP sufficient alone?
Good question. Thank you for that. So I would say, I think we need to make sure that we have good data to make those decisions on, if that's the case. And I think, what we've described right now at a local decision is what we currently have. That's what we do now. We look at the data, we look at the student, look how they're performing, and we make those decisions. So I think to do that, or if this resolution were to influence the law, I think we would go back to where we are now. So I do think our local teachers and our principals, they have data. We have sufficient data to make those kinds of decisions, and I think that's a good decision to have multiple data points to be able to make that.
Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Roswick, if I remember correctly, the funding for the bridge camps came from ESSER money. Is that correct? Is there any provision for what happens when that ESSER money runs out, is the first part of my question. And is there anything in the law that would provide for the 130 or so more teachers we would need if we retained these 2,600 students?
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Good questions. I may refer to Dr. Norton and/or Ms. Himmelgarn to make sure on the cost. There were provisions when this law passed that the state would continue to fund the summer bridge for those students in third grade, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's 3rd through 8th, but Liz, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that provision stays there. I don't know, again, back to the, if students were retained and that sort of thing. Typically in an elementary school, then you move the teachers to where, to where that happens. So if you had, just making this up, if you had 6 third grades and only 3 fourth grades, you would have more third grade teachers. It would probably be the same number of students, so I would imagine there may be some, pluses or minuses that would come in staffing. But to my knowledge, there's not additional dollars given for the retention of itself. Dr. Norton, you may want to add to that.
If I could add to that.
Sure.
My
Sorry.
thinking is that initially, yes, that would be true. But over time, those students will continue to be a grade behind. So over time, that the teacher numbers are going to massively increase if those were all retained. And is the funding that has been provided by the state adequate to cover all of the staff we would need for bridge camps if all of those students attended?
Again, I'm going to refer to Dr. Norton in a second. I believe the funds are there for, because we get based on the students who qualify for that, we get a dollar amount for that. And I would say this too, no, you're right. I mean, at some point that starts, the current law as it's written only allows for 1 retention. So if you retain in 3rd grade, you wouldn't be in 4th grade. If you move on to 3rd grade, even with the interventions, you can be retained in 4th grade if not, but it's a one-time retain. But there would be some bottlenecking, I would think, in those middle years. So Dr. Norton, if you would want to clarify.
Yep, the law states that in 23-24, the Learning Loss Bridge Camp transitions from its current middle school camp to a rising 4th grade through 8th grade camp. The early elementary camp ends at that time. And then the law also states that the funding for that camp continues sort of until they modify this law. The funding section indicates that it would be funded from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, the LEAP grant, and other funds as appropriated by the General Assembly, which means that that is funding that would be allocated annually as part of their budget setting process. So we could anticipate that we would have the funding to run the summer Learning Loss Bridge Camp based on that legislation and the way that it's worded right now, because that is also a reimbursement program, so we get funded for the students who attend the camp at this time. So if they ran it the same way, it would be funded the same way. There is nothing in the law that indicates any funding for additional staff related to retention. I think we'd be most likely to see the impact of that on staffing needs. For most of these students, they would end up probably retained in 4th grade if they didn't meet the interventions, not in 3rd grade because the interventions run through the 4th grade year. So the most likely impact would be when that initial class transitions to high school. So we would see a year where there were less students in the high school population, and then the following year an increase in that high school. That's probably the place that would hit most, I would say, dramatically, I guess, in terms of the difference in staffing needs.
Okay. Thank you. On the TANF funds, does it say that it definitely will cover that, or that it can come from TANF funds? My very loose recollection is that it was TANF funds that were left over that could be used for that, so that could change.
So the way that it's worded is that it must be funded from the TANF funds, the LEAP grant funds, and other funds appropriated by the General Assembly.
So they must appropriate additional funds? Is the way you read that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Myers, can you kind of speak to us about, sorry to put you on the spot, I think we've talked about this a little bit. I think there's been some confusion on who's exempted, are there exemptions? I don't think that information has gotten out there a lot to the public. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Henderson. So in terms of exemptions, the law as it was written only listed a handful, right? And as we went through and worked, and it's been months ago at this point, on a board policy amongst this body to reflect the change in the state legislation. We were really clear that, you know, federal law trumps what was passed by the state legislatures, right? So in our conversation at that time, we talked about not being discriminatory in our retention decisions. So with that being said, a student with a disability or suspected of having a disability, once a determination is made that a child is suspected of having a disability, the umbrellas provided by those federal laws trump what is in the state legislation, meaning that an IEP team or a 504 team would be able to make a decision as to say, no, this child is not going to be retained. We would love for them to still come to the camp and get the additional intervention, but we would not want to retain a child who had a disability or was suspected of having a disability that directly impacted their reading ability.
Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I have a comment first, but Mr. Myers, to follow up on that. So I know I've heard a couple of people talk about if a child is suspected to have dyslexia, but that's not identified until perhaps the end of the third grade year. Is that typically what happens? It takes like through that third grade year to really identify those students?
Thank you, Ms. Horn. I think that's a good question. The short answer is no, it shouldn't take that long, right? So if, for example, a student is identified as having characteristics of dyslexia, right? That does not mean necessarily that they have dyslexia or that a team is going to meet to determine that they need to be evaluated. So the key component here is that a student support team be convened and a determination be made. Again, once we don't suspect a child of having a disability until the team has met and articulates that child should be evaluated for a disability. So if a child has the characteristics of disability or if a parent wanted to call a support team, or if a whole child support team decides that we need to dig deeper into that child, that's the team that makes a recommendation to have the student evaluated. Once the decision is made to have the student evaluated, then they are quote unquote suspected of having a disability and would be covered under the umbrellas of those two pieces of federal law.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then my comment was really back to what Ms. Henderson talked about, the fact that we will look at our December legislative priorities, or our legislative priorities for next year in December. I think it would probably be more effective to look at this at the same time. I would really like to have, I know Dr. Norton has spent a lot of time on this, and so I would really like to have her expertise in what should we be asking the legislature to identify as those exceptions or the other data points, whatever those things are, because I think, like Dr. Reiswig, I've spoken with legislators who are pretty sure that this will probably be tweaked when we get when they get into session. So I feel like they're open to it. There's room for that. So I think that it would be wise for us to have the verbiage basically in agreement that we agree that third graders need to be able to read. However, we feel like we need to have some more local control, and these are the points that we would like to see as considerations in the law, because you've been working on this. You have experts available to you to weigh in on that. So I feel like that we have the opportunity in our legislative priorities to really articulate that, and hopefully they can get to a point that will be beneficial for students and also will really also satisfy the spirit of what they're looking for. So that's what I would prefer, is to have something that Dr. Norton can weigh in on as part of our legislative priorities that we review in December.
Reverend Butler?
Yes, a question and then a comment. The question I have is, just to make sure I'm hearing clear, Dr. Razik, just a few weeks ago, I think, we had heard that the number of schools we have that's on this list, and I know at least two of the elementary schools in District 1 is on the lowest part of the list. One has come up a little bit. How many other schools in the district are on the list of some way, and the second part of that question is that TCAP score the reason or a major reason why they're on the list?
So to the first one, and Dr. Norton, check me on this. I think we have 4 CSI or priority schools that are shown in the bottom 4%, and you're correct. On having 4 in the region that they're in or in the district that they're in. I think the number on like targeted or there's different federal language on it, but they're basically schools that maybe a identified subgroup is not performing where it needs to. I think it's like, I want to think we had 20, is it that much, Dr. Norton, do you remember? Okay, Dr. Wilson's looking too. So I think, but it's so priority is obviously one that is just like bottom 5 achievement compared with everybody else. And then you have like 2 other groups of those that are kind of targeted for additional interventions. And that's like if a student group is performing in the bottom 5%, if it was a standalone school, like that's one way to do it. So those are, all of it is critical, but those priority schools that are in the bottom 5% are the ones that were kind of, the state lists as highest priority. The targeted schools for different kinds of interventions, those are typically the ones that are some dollars. You can roll back on and off of those, and we'll see that list change from time to time. So have I stalled long enough to give you time to get a number, guys? No? Okay. I'll see if Dr. Norton has that number for you to be sure.
Yes, we have 29 combination between the CSI, our ATSI, and our TSI. Those go onto the list for different reasons. So our CSI is for overall accountability. Our ATSI and TSI is dependent upon their different subgroup data, and so all of the different schools on there might be on there for different reasons or different groups. And included within those accountability measures is achievement data as well as chronic absenteeism and grad rate.
Thank you. I have a great concern about retention because retention affects more than just grades. And I do also agree with Dr. Razik that retention is not a model for teaching kids how to read. I agree with Mr. McMillan that you need to be able to read by the 3rd grade to be successful. But if you can't read in the 3rd grade, staying in the 3rd grade may not make you successful. It may make it even more challenging for someone to be successful. And I know, I believe, based on the information that I have, that it would affect District 1 in a great way, just because of what we've heard about the schools on the list. But also, I believe it's going to hurt the district in a great way. And I believe the best way for the district to deal with it is to have more autonomy to deal with it. If that means taking time to take a look at it and have the legislative committee and look at it, that's fine. But I think that if we don't look at it from a district perspective, that what can we do along with being in compliance with the law. But at this, the way it stands right now, our hands are tied. We don't have a lot we can do. But I think if we had, if this resolution or a resolution like this was in place, then we would give our superintendent and staff more opportunity to have a bigger impact. So I'm for a resolution to give us the autonomy to do the best we can with what we have and making sure that our kids can read by the 3rd grade. If they can't, we have a plan that's going to be more effective than just holding them back.
Thank you. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Riswick, do we have any idea what would happen if TCAP scores are not available at the end of the year?
Good question, Ms. Owen. Thank you. We've been told they will be. No, no, I'm kidding. No.
We've been told that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's so. I mean, there have been times in the past, as everyone knows, that when they haven't been, there've been revisions to different kinds of things. So I would assume that the department would make some kind of revision at that point, but it does all right on that current law.
Okay, thank you. For the parent appeal process, is there how early can parents appeal that retention? Does it have to happen after the summer bridge camp, or can it happen as soon as those TCAP scores may or may not come back?
I'm going to have Dr. Norton, thank you, to spot check me, but my understanding is that once those TCAP scores come back, I think that's when the appeal happens. And what I was told in a meeting with the State Department is their goal is to have a 5-day turnaround on that, because it was a concern of other superintendents as we met to have conversations with the department that that very concern. Would we get the scores in time to be able to have the appeals, and would the state be able to hear the appeals and turn them back around before families had to enroll their student in summer bridge program? And we were told that they think they could and could turn those around within 5 days. So Dr. Norton, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that was my understanding from the meeting I was at.
Do I remember right that we've only had those scores back on time once since 2015? Is that approximately right?
You may be right. I know there are times when we have not had them back more than once.
So just like we have to go back and change their grades after those come in, could we have to change their retention status after those come back?
I think you asked good questions, that I was in a group of superintendents who asked the same questions of the department. And again, we were told that they felt like it could be a 5-day turnaround and we would have time to do that. So at this point, that's what we have, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a brief comment. I wanted Mr. Butler to thank him. I want to thank him for his comment, and I appreciate that perspective. I see what you're saying, and I agree totally with that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Ms. Pike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with so many on the board, Mr. McMillan, that, children need to be able to read. I think that this bill is something that is going to help us push Tennessee in that direction of having kids that can read at a very proficient level, and also identify students that do have issues. But I worry that if we wait too long, that's going to push us another year out, and I would really hate to have kids suffer for and struggle more because of adults' decisions.
All right. Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Pike, I would just say that the legislature, we always do our legislative priorities in December because they don't start until January. So I don't think the timing of pushing it a month is really going to negatively impact that. And I would just appreciate having Dr. Norton be able to weigh in on specifics. So I don't think that would negatively impact that.
Okay. So do we have any more discussion on this item? All right, so moving on to item C. And Ms. Spike, I believe this is you as well.
Yes. As with so many things, if you wait until it's perfect, it may never happen. So this is something that I've only been working on for a short period of time, but certainly came up in our retreat, our 2-day retreat. And, I know Knox County Schools has had a lot of kind of moving around of sorts and moving around of some committees. And so this has kind of come from several different things. I've met with lots of people and discussed this. Mr. Ryswick, Mr. Dupler, Mr. Myers, several other people. And my meeting with Mr. Myers was really great, and he had so much better words than I did. And I would wonder if he wouldn't mind to speak on that.
Thank you, Ms. Pike. Yeah, so I'll just briefly sort of overview. It was a long conversation, so I don't know that I'll perfectly capture it, but I think that, as I understand it, the purpose is that you wanted to explore a committee around, a board committee specifically around really the Division of Student Success. And as I recall, where we landed was your hope was to create an area of input that could help our division better communicate, I guess, the services and programs that are available to students through the Knox County Schools, and specifically the Division of Student Success. And that is a very short interview, but that is essentially what I took from it, was a board committee that could help us, the Division of Student Success, better make known what all of our various programs and departments do, and how those departments function to support the schools and the children of Knox County.
Yes, essentially that. And the parts of that I don't have perfected as that I've talked with Gary and Terry about are that with a board committee, it would be public noticed. The things that we talk about are public record, so we would not necessarily be able to talk about specific children and certain things like that that would really be limited, and so I worry about that part. But if this were to be a committee that were functioning outside of that, I still would love to have the support of the board with that. And some notes that I had taken is, how we communicate with parents, because there are so often times that I think, especially to speak to parents that have special needs children, you can be so overwhelmed with things, and when you're getting paper and getting materials, it's so hard to suss out that stuff. So that's just one example of something that this would look at. But really making sure that students are successful in this new model that we have, so that we can properly serve them and also minimize some liability on the district. But I really want this to be something that could be collaborative, and I'm open to that, and that's why I went ahead and put that for this month, because I really would like to have this conversation with the board.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Pike, I'm pretty visual, and I'm like trying to put all the pieces together in my head and kind of map it out. It would be great for me if maybe on Wednesday you had a rough outlines / sketch of kind of what you're thinking, kind of the bullet points. I want to repeat back what I think I'm hearing to make sure that I'm capturing some of it right. So this would be a board level committee that would make recommendations to Mr. Meyer's department about how to better communicate and engage families around the opportunities for their students who may have disabilities. Is that?
It's not specific to that.
Okay.
No, that was just one good example. I think there are so many other areas for student success, and so it is a little broad, and I can absolutely put together those bullet points, but I just think that there are a lot of different areas. Some are, discipline and some of those encompassing issues. I know that during the workshop that we had, we talked about that the AEE was no longer, and that there were some board members that wanted some of those aspects, but that we also want to see action. So this would be something that would prioritize an actionable thing, which would potentially be asking the board to do something. But I'm open to this not necessarily being a board committee or it being a board committee.
But if I boil it all down, the function of this committee is to make specific recommendations around student success to Mr. Meyer's department. I'm trying to.
Yes, or to the board to have a motion or actionable item, or to the superintendent.
Yeah, but basically trying to be, I want to make sure I understand the theory. So the theory is that the board, because we're elected by the people, we have certain insights into particular challenges or nuances that are happening in the community, and that by having a regular discussion around what are families experiencing in the community that might not be aiding their student success, that we then could relay that in the form of recommendations and/or other things
Yes.
to Mr. Myers' department and/or the board.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Triplett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dupler, aren't there some guidelines we have to kind of hang that committee on? Can you speak to this?
Mr. Dupler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Triplett. So, yes, I mean, what Ms. Bike and I talked about was that if it's a board member committee, there are some rules about that. Generally, it's 3 board members is the way that usually works, because you have to have an odd number, but you can't have a quorum, so you can't have 5. And then those committees are temporary. So you'd be looking at probably, a year would be kind of the time span. But it could be shorter, could be longer, but certainly not a standing committee, because you can't have that. And then the other thing she highlighted, which is if it's 3 board members, then everything's going to be public. All the meetings, everything public noticed. And the problem with that is, you certainly could not get into specifics with regard to individual students, because all that would be FERPA and IDEA and various levels of privacy concerns there. So, that would be the issue with a board level committee. Now, if there's a different type of committee created from a different source, and then maybe there's only 1 board member on it, then you wouldn't have all those hoops to jump through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. So I guess just a question for structure of the committee. Are we talking about a board committee? Are we talking, and aside from that, I don't know, Mr. Myers or Dr. Reiswick, if you could speak to some of the other committees that you have, or I know that we have Ms. Owenby that works with some of our students too. But my first question, I guess, to you, Ms. Spike, is what would be that structure? Because I agree with Mr. Watson. We need to know exactly what we would be voting on, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely. Well, I think to Mr. Dupler in saying that if it were a board committee, it would be short-term, limited. And I think that maybe that's where we would start, to have something that were short-term to dig into, see, are there things, what are the things? And of course, we couldn't go into details, but then to see, is this something that needs to carry on? And then in that case, it would turn over to be not a board committee, but a separate outside committee with an appointed board member.
okay. So, Mr. Dupler, how would that work as a separate outside committee with an appointed board member? Would that board member manage and run that committee? What would that look like?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. If there's a committee that's formed outside the board, and the most common way to do that would be the director of schools would put together some type of a committee. And at that point, then, one board member could be appointed to that committee by the chair. So that's the way that would work. Now, if the board forms a board committee of 3 and it's temporary, there would still have to be something happen. In other words, the committee just can't transform to a different type of committee at some point. So if the board were to form a board committee, you all can do that, but then there'd have to be another decision at some point in time to transform that committee, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Reiswick or Mr. Myers, could one of you speak to I know we have some new committees that you formed, and then Mr. Myers, what we have currently?
Sure. So, for our special pops, obviously Sue Ownby does an outstanding job with the Special Ed Family Advisory Committee, and I believe that she and Ms. Bike have connected, and I've obviously, we would welcome any board member to be involved in that work. More importantly, I think that Dr. Ryswick was really particular in trying to ensure that there were multiple levels of inputs for families. I think that, again, it goes back to what is the purpose of it, right? If the purpose of it is to gain some sort of clarity around your student's plan or your rights as a parent, or how you get your student evaluated, the best place to get that information will always be at the school level, right? So if my student has an IEP, the best person for me to contact to get clarity around the student's program is going to be the case manager. And then there are subsequent structures above the case manager that can also be used as supports. But to get the best answer to a specific concern or point of confusion for a student, the best point of input is always going to be the school level. And then we also have the regional family committees and the regional teacher committees. So I think that we have, again, multiple places where folks can get input to the district if they decide that they want to get involved in that way. And that's, again, based on the discussion as it has gone, it would seem, trying again to get that information to parents who again have concerns or questions about their child's programming, whether it be special ed, RTI, ELL, whatever the case may be. The best point of input will always be the school level, and then the structures above.
Did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I would echo what Mr. Meyer said. I mean, I'm excited that the teacher councils are beginning this week, and so they're being, and great conversations with Paul Hancock. We've had some good things with Pekka and conversations, but we were talking through that the other day, and just we're expanding those voices, right? I mean, we'll now have 91 family members in those councils. We'll have 91 teacher voices in those councils now, and so. I'm looking forward to the outcomes we get with that and how we can really get good ideas. I was able to, because I can't be at all of them, obviously, because they're meeting on the same day, so was able to kind of do a video introduction, and part of that is, there are no silver bullets to this work where we are now. Like, this stuff is extremely difficult, extremely challenging, multiple layers, and it is something we want to do with families, with communities. It's something we want to do with teachers. And we need those voices at the table. So just echoing what Mr. Meyer said, I mean, we have built those in. We're going to work as well to anyone who wants to be involved in their school, really getting a good list of what those organizations are at every school. We think that's a great place, as Mr. Meyer said, to have people involved there, and then also at the regional level. And then, I'll have the same later this month where my accelerated student learning committee starts to meet, so our council. So I do think that, and I'm glad, again, it's a lot of work for a lot of people, a lot of calls to the community to do that, and I think people have responded, so we're excited about that.
Thank you. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wasn't intending to ask this, Dr. Ryswick, but how many kids are on the Student Accelerated Council? Is it only students? It's a technical.
No, thank you for the question. So the council is not a student council.
Okay.
It's actually as community, so we have, there's family members, the families, there's business leaders, there are educators that are all on that council, but there are not students.
So no students on that council, and just curious the number. You said 91 for the other two.
Yeah, that one's about, I see the spreadsheet in my head, so I have to make sure it's either 34 or 35.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Dupler, just a technical question. I don't think I've been on the board when a new board level committee has been established. What are the minimum things that have to be in place for the establishment of a board level committee? For instance, does it need a charter, a defined charter, and or scope of work? Or like what's the things that have to be done in order for it to even be established beyond the vote? Like what are the minimum things you have to have?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Watson. So the board policy doesn't really define that, just that the committee be formed to the best extent possible by the board. I mean, a good example would be the Superintendent Search Committee. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a committee of three that operated under the conditions that we've talked about, and but of course the board wasn't super detailed when it was first set out. I mean gave it some general purpose and some guidelines, and then I know some things were tweaked along the way, but I mean, that's probably the best
Yeah,
example
that's
of one
true.
recently.
So there wasn't in the net committee, there wasn't a rigid, written, well-defined scope. It was in general through a conversation of the board, right?
Yeah,
So-
it was more guidelines, and as I'm sure you recall,
Yeah.
the board would give.
I do now, thanks for.
Yeah, would give the different purposes, at different times, right?
Right.
And say different goals, I would
Sure,
say.
yeah, thank you.
Mr. Triplett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mike, I can appreciate the heart behind it. My question is, I'm just trying to figure out how it benefits us beyond, the work that we're already doing in the schools currently and some of the advisory councils we have, and kind of what the benefit is beyond that would do more than what's already being done.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And like the conversation that I had with Mr. Myers, there is a lot of great work that's going on in all of these places. And this is something, just to speak, if I'm representing my district and the parents in there, and the things that I've heard from them is that there is this struggle with them knowing what they have access to. And, I know that, the pamphlet of rights is out there, but if you go to our website, kind of looking, it's really meaty, and it's kind of, there's not kind of like a boom, boom, boom of like, here it is, and kind of refining that. And so looking at that and talking to parents of like, how does this work? Because parents don't always have the option to come to meetings. We have so many parents in our district parents and guardians in our district that have 3 jobs, or where they work is just, it doesn't work for them to come to these things, and having their voice kind of heard. So this is something that would kind of facilitate that, to look at like, okay, this is what school levels are doing, and are we being successful in this? Because I think some of the programs we have in place are really amazing. I think a lot of parents don't know about it. And not for, they just don't know who to ask or where to ask. And so kind of a little bit of that in there.
Okay, so is there any more discussion on this item? All right, so moving on to item 9D. This is the approval of the school zone for the new Northwest Sector Elementary School. Is there any discussion on this item? All right, so seeing none, we are at public forum. Ms. Henderson? At the lobby. Oh, sorry, we have a lobbyist discussion. I was looking at the regular meeting agenda. Mr. Duplor, do you have a update for us on that? I believe you were going to check with procurement, and there were some questions about the lobbyists the county used at the time. And
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the privilege to talk about the lobbyist. So I guess the good news for the board is that the board has options as far as a lobbyist is concerned. I mean, the way that procurement and the county have defined a lobbyist is that it is a professional service. So that means that the board can seek out and contract with, a service that it chooses. So that's one option. I mean, another option is that the board can do a more formal search as well. Could ask for, 3 or more quotes and qualifications for, a lobbyist service. And then obviously the board still has the option, although it's not required, to do a more formal RFP through procurement. So all those are viable options. Now, when it comes to using the lobbyist that the commission and the mayor use, there would need to be some discussions, with that particular lobbyist firm. That contract, I've reviewed it. I mean, it's really specific to the county. It doesn't have language in it that would necessarily include the school system. So that's something that would need to be explored with that firm. But of course, that would be a potential option, just like any other of the options that I've discussed.
Right, and just for clarity for board members, I did ask Gary to look at that contract in the event that we did have to go through the procurement process as maybe a temporary solution to not having because a lot of people had expressed concerns about not having anyone in Nashville this session. So I did ask him to look at that contract and to see if, as a temporary solution, that might be something we could do, use the same lobbyist. Of course, that would be a discussion that the board would need to have, but it was more in lines of options so that we could discuss how we wanted to move forward with it.
Exactly right, Madam Chair. And again, that's not a contract that the board could just jump into because it's for a specific amount, for a specific purpose with the commission. But again, if the board wanted to reach out to that group, which I believe is Stones River, and try and ask for a similar type of contract, that would be a possibility.
Right, and there's no guarantee that they would even want to enter into it, right?
Correct.
It was just more of exploring what options were out there for us at this point. So that's how that came into play, just so everyone knows. I was just curious if that could be a possible short-term solution. So thank you for checking into that. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some good news, which is not my way, so bear with me. I was on a call this morning with, it was a webinar with TSBA, and to give a little background, the Tennessee Legislative Network that has always been what we call our legislative representative, around 2016, they stopped meeting regularly, and there's always been some confusion about why and what's going on and that sort of thing, and they just started sending us the legislative reports. Now there is some clarity. And the Tennessee Legislative Network was sort of part of NSBA, which we are no longer a member of. So the TLN representative, that title no longer exists. So it will just be called a legislative representative from this point forward. And TSBA seems to be taking a much more hands-on approach to that. So they are planning to meet regularly and give us more regular updates. Basically, it sounds like they will be giving us the kind of information that we've previously been getting through class. So the amount of information that we will get directly, I think, will be greatly improved from TSBA. They are also looking at having meetings with all of the reps in the state regularly so that we can also see what other reps are talking about in their districts, and that will be a little more clear to us from a statewide perspective. So I think I feel much better about that. I feel much more supported there. So I think that will help a lot, and I think that will also give them the support of being able to say this is what is being said statewide or not. I would note that the firm the county uses does have some conflicts of interest, I believe, with public schools. So we really need to look into that and be sure we understand those conflicts. And I assume that would be for a later discussion. Since we do have support from TSBA now that is greatly increased over what we've had in the past, I would feel comfortable looking into an RFP process so that we could talk about what we want in a lobbyist, so we don't end up in a situation like we have been with us having expectations and not communicating those. So looking at the RFP process as I've seen it before, we would lay that all out on the front end. Here are our expectations. Or in a request for qualifications, they would lay that all out on the front end. And then we could look at all of those and say, does this look like what we want, to determine which of those we like. So I think that might be a possibility to give us some time to really consider what we want from that lobbyist as we move forward.
Right. And just to be clear, I don't even know that the county's lobbyists would want to work with, right? That was just
They have 40 clients.
Yeah,
so-
that's just an option I asked him to look at, just because I had heard those concerns. So what I'm hearing from you is it sounds like we will be getting good information, and you feel confident with that.
They've always given us they've always given us a lot of information, but it's not been boiled down into something that was very usable. So I think it will be now, and I think they will be listening much more to what we need.
And as we go through the RFP or whatever the board decides to do, I guess the biggest note of importance is we are our own representation in Nashville right now. So it will be on us to make sure that we are reaching out to, I don't know, Representative McKenzie left, didn't he? But our representatives and about the issues that we're concerned about, or that, you know, these mandates that do not come with funding, things like that. I would think it would be especially important to us, being one of the larger districts, to make sure that they are aware of that.
Right. They've also laid out some duties for the representative, and of course, those are just what TSBA says our duties are. So those will be available at policy review for us to consider also.
All right. Well, thank you for the happy news, Ms. Owen. That doesn't happen a lot. Okay, so are we? Okay. All right, so Ms. Henderson, moving to public forum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one person signed up for public forum, Miss Patty Saha. State your name and county of residence, and you have 3 minutes. Welcome tonight.
Thank you. I'm Patty Saha, Knox County. I'm a resident of Hayden Hill, and I appreciate your careful review of the rezoning proposal. I have 3 points for your consideration. First, there are 2 entrances to Hayden Hill, and the newest phase is only 2 miles from Hardin Valley Elementary, making it the closest commute to the school of all the neighborhoods affected by the rezoning. Furthermore, it is less than a quarter mile from other homes on the south side of Sam Lee that are not being rezoned. So a bus heading to Hardin Valley Elementary will continue to drive Sam Lee Road. It makes sense to pick up all the students on the south side of Sam Lee, since the bus is already traveling the route, rather than creating a zoning split in the middle of Sam Lee Road. There is no alternative path than to drive past Hayden Hill, and this makes the most of a route already established to Hardin Valley Elementary. Future developments have not yet begun on the north side of Sam Lee, so rezoning the north side to the new school can be established for future buyers, while the south side remains at Hardin Valley Elementary. Second, please consider grandfathering families with students who have children at all 3 Hardin Valley schools. By requiring an older sibling at both the middle and the high school for a family to continue at Hardin Valley Elementary, we reduce the number of students eligible to stay at their current school, while still helping those families who have the most drop-off challenges. Third, please offer the choice to stay at Hardin Valley Elementary to current cross-country runners. It is the only elementary sport, aside from track, that requires students to attend the school for which they compete. Furthermore, cross-country is a fall sport and requires a volunteer to run the program. Coach Jeff volunteers to head up both the elementary and the middle school programs, so the kids benefit from working with the same coach over a stretch of 3rd to 8th grade. We practice throughout the summer, and the team always places in the top 3 at state, having won 7 championships in 11 years. The program is one of a kind due to the leadership of Coach Jeff, who has both the experience and dedication to be a volunteer coach who heads up 2 fall sport programs and offers summer training. We also run with Coach Jeff for postseason cross country, which includes AAU national races. My son has competed and medaled at these competitions for the past 2 years due to the quality of this running program. The new school will not have a cross-country team ready for the fall season. Please consider these 3 points in your review of the rezoning. I appreciate your time and trust you understand the need for some exceptions to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saha. That concludes public forum.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. So moving to board forum, Ms. Deckard, Reverend Butler, Ms. Owen. Mr. Watson? Ms. Henderson? Ms. Bite? Ms. Horn?
Sure. I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Carly Harrington and Public Affairs on all their hard work on the coupon books. That's fantastic. And also all the school personnel, the bookkeepers, all those folks that just spent a ton of time doing coupon books. It's a massive amount of work. And so I appreciate all that extra effort. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Triplett? Mr. McMillan? All right. Meeting is adjourned.